We're taking the God story to a geeky place. Well, you can geek out on the human brain all day long. There's so much discovery. There's so many scientific and technological advancements in what we can do with the brain and what the brain can do and how the brain can interact. And yet, what's crazy is we're just scratching the surface. Today, on our SciTech Talk, we are talking about not just your brain and some spectacular information on your brain, but your brain on God. The old, this is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. Well, what is your brain like on God? What does that do? And is there any evidence of extraordinary intelligent design? Was there any evidence that there's not? It's probably a little easier. We just don't have time for the latter. But I'm inviting. He's become like an old friend now. I adore this man. He is brilliant, and what a wonderful heart. Douglas L. Is well versed in both physics and math. He wrote a book, Proofs of God, a conversation between doubt and reason, which to me, Douglas, is kind of C.S. Lewis-esque. And it reads like that to me, and I just adore the book. You've also written a book that I want to allude to today in our conversation, Counting to God, a personal journey through science to belief. Welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Michelle. It's a joy to be here. Truly is.
Okay.
And to be part of the show.
The human brain. The human brain
Oh, wow.
is absolutely amazing. When you think of what goes on in the brain of one person, who you're listening right now, your brain has a computational ability that rivals all of the technology combined on the planet. There are more synapses and cells in your brain than there are stars in a galaxy. I mean, it is astounding what our brains are. And the idea that it just happened without some kind of programming is akin to this computer that, can I just tell you how long it took me to learn how to podcast, Doug? I mean, seriously, to get all of the little things lined up and make sure that this is speaking to this. I mean, I don't know if that's much intelligence, but to think that just happened by chance, any more than our brain did, it's really hard to wrap your head around. But you've come to that conclusion as well.
Absolutely. In my book, Proofs of God, I go through 3 proofs of the existence of God. And one of them is a mathematical proof based on the impossibility of everything being just right when you look at the engineering structures in DNA. But my second proof, I tried to make very simple, and it's just common sense. And for the common sense, I use the human brain, because we've never seen anything more complex in the entire universe than the human brain. I mean, as you pointed out, the number of neurons, brain cells we have, is about 100 billion. It's like stars in a galaxy. And each of those has an estimated 7,000 connections. And so you've got hundreds of trillions of connections. Each of those has multiple processing units. It's, as you said, the human has the memory storage capacity of the size of the World Wide Web, of the entire internet. I mean, not that I'm that smart generally, that I can access that, but I mean, the capability of it works by light and by electricity. Researchers have found that when the brain solves problems, it creates tens of millions of structures in a little area. We don't know how it works. It's called a quantum computer, which is a level of computing far beyond Microsoft and Intel and all that. I mean, it's almost a sci-fi level. I mean, think of all your brain can do. You have 600 muscles or so that it controls. And a lot of the things it does without you're even thinking about it, balancing, breathing. There's so much. When you remember something, how do you suddenly, you're thinking of something that must happen to you. It certainly happens to me at my old age a lot. I'm trying to remember something and then, aha, it comes to me. Well, how do you know when you finally got it? You know, I mean, what technology is that tells you not only that it, you know, it comes up with these multiple things, but when you finally click on something, all of a sudden, all these connections in your brains, yeah, that's it. I mean, it's technology beyond belief, but we all take it for granted because we all have one.
I am amazed by that. If you think about that, when I'm doing a search on my computer, when I'm doing a Google search, there's great technology that just didn't happen. Somebody programmed that technology in a Google search, and there are algorithms and there are math computations that go behind it to try to make sure I'm getting the information that I'm searching for. So I put something in there to say the human brain and God, and it will come up with dozens of links. Yet it cannot possibly say this is the exact one you're looking for. This is you, no matter how much information you keep trying to put in, you're still. It's like talking to Alexa. You can ask her for, I'm
Yeah.
looking for information on the brain, and Alexa will say, "All right, we'll order pizza tonight." I mean, and that's pretty heavy technology. So what you're saying
Yeah.
is one of those goosebump moments that says, "Wow, our brain is extraordinary technology," and that's just skimming the surface. How do you explain how my eyes see something and my brain is able to take that into consideration, not
Oh,
just take a picture like my camera or my phone here, but also to be able to decide what that is, to have an emotional connection with it, to decide
right.
how I'm going to interact with it. It's the levels can go on forever.
Right. Facial recognition technology. I mean, the brain had it well before smartphones and much better. You know, it's the eye, the human eye. I mean, that's a whole nother subject you could get into
Right.
on your program, and it's the technology. It's I mean, how do you get technology? We've never seen any technology in all of history and all of science. There's no explanation for technology other than it was designed. Now, we've had this delusion for 150 years, you know, that we owe to this guy called Charles Darwin, who said, well, things can get just a little bit better. Okay, no. You know, that might work for very simple structures. It's been proven in all the computer simulations, it doesn't work for anything complex because as you keep making changes, it starts breaking down faster than it builds up, if you're following what I'm saying here, okay? And there's a whole level of very complex mathematics here. There's very detailed computer simulations. Complex things, when you start making little changes, break down.
Okay. And
We
isn't that
have
also the second law of thermodynamics kind of
second
talks
law of
about things
thermodynamics. I'm
breaking
very
down?
impressed, Michelle. That's
It's that amazing brain God made.
that's very good. Very good. Yeah, it's one of that is probably the most fundamental law of physics that everything breaks down. Okay, that randomness is what you get out of the natural world. Yet we all have this technology that is so amazing. Nobody can figure out how it works. Nobody knows why we're conscious. Nobody knows exactly how those images react and exactly how I see you and how you see me, how we hear sounds and beautiful symphonies and all our senses. Nobody knows. We just say, well, there's light and electricity traveling around between brain cells. I mean, it's really pretty primitive understanding when you think about it.
Everything that we have as well is any kind of technology seems to have birthed itself from some kind of bioengineering. In other words, from something in
Uh,
nature, biomimicry, I think is the word, biomimicry, where we look at nature and say, oh, I think we can do that. We look at a bird, hey, can man fly? We look at a shark and say, hey, what if we have skin like that we can synthetically produce? Would we swim and be able to dive better? Everything that we have is some kind of biomimicry. does what does that say about us? What does that say about
says we're,
nature?
it says that God is great. I mean, the right brother studied birds to learn how to fly.
So the
There's so
technology was
much.
already there.
Yeah, I mean, right, and God did it better. I mean, just look at birds flying around the air. They're pretty. I've got where I live. I live on the water, and there's pelicans, and
Ah,
boy, those birds, they just effortlessly just glide.
and
It
no
is truly
chemtrails.
amazing.
I mean, the
Yeah.
only waste is maybe on your windshield once in a while, but there's, but it's amazing how efficient the processes of nature are. And getting back to the extraordinary brain that we have, you had written an article that you sent me, and I loved this, called "The Human Brain." It was from 2017 from Science Brain. It highlighted some of the extraordinary things that we've talked about, but
Yeah.
also touched on just how little we know about the brain, that we get so impressed with ourselves
Yeah.
because, well, the cerebral cortex is able to compulate blah 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 blah, as if we are so in the know. And yet you liken that technology to, like some kind of primitive animal trying to look at a spaceship and say, oh, spaceship shiny. you know
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, my analogy, right? We stick needles or cut off parts of the brain, and we say, "Gee, this has something to do with memory or whatever," by cutting things out. It's sort of it's like the kid walks out of the jungle and sees an airplane broken on the ground, walks around it a few times and says, I think this thing on the back had something to do with why it moved. I mean, that
Pat
is as
yourself on the
close.
back. Look how smart we
Yeah,
are.
wow, really genius here. I'm like, he's going to go out and build a plane, or we're going to go out now and build a human brain. And another fact that I put in that article, Michelle, is that the energy efficiency of the human brain is at least 1,000 times more energy efficient than any human circuit could ever be.
Oh.
So, I mean, so how can you say, if you really want to be honest about it, okay, and you tell me you're going to be a totally objective, I just believe in science person, well, there's no other explanation for the human brain but that it was designed by God.
Well, it's hard to get to any other conclusion when you look at the complexity, and you look at the math. Being a numbers guy, help me to understand, maybe wrap my head around the amount of the many eons it would have to take if it were possible for a human, not even a human brain, but a worm brain to be able to evolve just by chance. The analogy of shaking a bunch of electronic components together in a box long
Right.
enough, and eventually you'll come up with a cell phone, because that's basically what we're looking at.
Right. It's never going to happen, obviously. These kind of structures forming accidentally is like, a tornado goes through a junkyard and there suddenly it leaves behind a fully functional 747 jet. It's just crazy. And again, second law of thermodynamics, when you start making random changes, and that's all the Darwinian mechanism is, random mutations, changes, you can keep the best of the worst, the best mistakes, but it all goes downhill. And it is just so awesome, the brains that we all have. And we all take it for granted. We
Yeah,
really do.
we kind of do, but our
Yeah.
brains being as spectacular as they are, and understanding that I have no problem debating out ideas from Darwinian evolution. It was a theory that, a working theory in the past. We should have those conversations, because unlike the going idea that there's science deniers and there's settled science, science is never settled. I don't care if you're a
Right.
flat earther. Give me your data and let's look at it and see if there's something we can learn. Now, we know that the earth is not flat, but maybe there's something we can learn. Maybe there's something in your data that could teach us both something entirely new. The idea that there's a scientism, like a religion, that
Yeah.
does not want to take into account anything other than what you can touch and knock on and experience, I think we're really missing out on, well, the obvious.
Absolutely. Einstein challenged settled science, which was Newton's laws at the time,
Okay.
and he
Okay.
developed
Yeah.
and which had been settled for hundreds of years, and he explained all sorts of phenomena. So even though all the scientists of his age hadn't thought of it and believed what he couldn't do what he did, but he did it because settled science is just sort of, shut up, I'm right, go away.
That's mom
Yeah,
science. That's not settled
yeah.
science. That's mom science. Shut up. I've
So,
said it. That settles it. Go on, kids, and play. That's what that is.
but yeah, I mean, but if you're really, the people who say I believe in science, I went to MIT. I mean, I majored in math and physics, and I love that stuff. I think you got to follow where the evidence goes and not say, decide in advance where it goes. When you find probably, again, the most complex structure in the entire universe, and you realize, if you really want to be honest with yourself, and all the top scientists know that, most of them just don't have the guts to say it, that Darwin's theory is, fake science, the dustbin of history right now. You've got no choice but to say the human brain and all of our other fantastic parts were designed by God.
Well, and that's pretty exciting. I mean, that on a scientific level is like, ooh, this is cool. So if you come to that conclusion, our brains are wired to say, I want to know more. I want to understand a little
Yes.
bit more about the designer. I think it's, we see it all the time. We see a star on our favorite movie, and then you go to the gossip columns. Okay, who are they married to? How many kids do they have? What's the scoop, right? Well, I want to know the scoop on what we can tell about this designer. Now, I might be a girl of faith, and I may lend my ideas to a biblical designer, a biblical creation model. But I want to know, do we know from looking at our brain and the design of our brains what the brain behind the designer really looks like?
Well, the Bible says we're made in the image of God, and I don't know exactly what that means, but we have the capacity to love. We have the capacity for rational thought. And those point to a loving, rational creator. I very much believe that the Bible is true. And I think I find this subject just so exciting. It's really grabbed my life, Michelle, and I've spent decades thinking about this because I think I told you, I used to be an atheist when I was at MIT. And my first book, Counting to God, I had a lot of scientists help me, and I wrote through 7 areas of science, all of which strongly point to God. And the interesting thing is the science gets stronger every year for God. It's not the other way around.
Yeah.
But in this new book, Proofs of God, people said, well, you got to write something simpler. And that's what I've tried to do. But this subject, if you're willing to look at it, it just grabs you.
It's maybe should come.
I had a guy.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that after church yesterday, a guy came up to me and couldn't thank me enough for writing my second book because he said it made a huge difference in his faith, and that's what keeps me going. That's just so wonderful when someone does that to you.
I love that. I see that because while faith is a wonderful thing and it's guided me, there's something really exciting about looking into science, looking into what's around us, hearing scientific discoveries, and seeing another dimension of God, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If
Well, God is
you
the ultimate.
go ahead, I'm sorry. There's just a little tiny delay in our Zoom call today, so I'll let you go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I was just going to say God's the ultimate designer, and it. we're so beat up on sometimes, or we feel beat up on, I think, in our society. If you're a person of faith, you're dismissed as irrational. It couldn't be more wrong. I mean, that is so far from the truth. And that's what I find exciting. There's more science every year now into the incredible design, not just in human beings, but in the structure of the universe, the laws of physics. So there's so much more for a person of faith to be excited about from science every year.
So, as we come to our final minutes together, I thought I would ask you, Doug, if there are some facts that either about the brain or our brain's connection with the universe that point to some of this scientific evidence of intelligent design, and even more specifically, who that designer is.
Another thing about the brain is uh, our bodies build machine parts called proteins. And one of the things I get into in my book is that we've got 54 unique machine parts in our brains. This idea that we're just sort of some slightly improved version of a chimpanzee or whatever, total nonsense. And mathematically, I show you couldn't possibly get one of these by chance. I mean, the universe,
Yes.
no matter how old you think it is, it hasn't been around that long. And, people say, well, there's a lot of planets out there. Well, they really don't understand the math because the numbers are so far beyond that. It's incredible. But I don't know. I mean, I've struggled with this, Michelle, and I think anybody, maybe other people have better examples. I think, what does it mean to say we're made in the image of God? I think a lot of it has to do with our brains, our ability to love, to feel compassion. We all, my new car has this technology. You get close to something and it beeps.
Yeah.
And I think we all have that technology in a moral sense. It's called a conscience.
Yeah.
And how did that develop? I mean, and the capacity for rational thought, friendship, just a lot of wonderful qualities.
And even that hardwired God-shaped hole, I think it was referred to a few years ago as the God spot, as though we are all hardwired somehow to have this belief in God. And of course, Darwinianists will say, well, that's something that evolved. Well, what is the... I get that you could say, okay, those who have a belief beyond who we are might be better. And if that is better, why isn't it better? And so then... again, why isn't that from God? I mean, it's like circular logic that it's hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, I have a cartoon in my new book that pokes fun at this "it evolved" concept. I mean, that's what they say about everything. No matter what you say about how amazing could be the eye of the eagle or the nose of the dog or the sonar capabilities of the dolphin, they just say, "Oh, that evolved." I mean, even though the computer simulations don't work that way. So, it's, I try to take that head on because I think that's a misconception in a lot of people that, our schools teach it, unfortunately. Some of them do that. Oh, well, this stuff just got better. That's a whole nother area.
Well, that's something to wrap your head around, isn't it? If we have a God-shaped hole called the God spot that predisposes us to believe in God, and that's better, I'm just going to leave it there. Think about that for a moment. Then maybe it's actually better. We've been talking with Doug L. He is an amazing person. I mean, I just love you. I love our conversations. I love what I learned from you. I love your book, Proofs of God. If you're watching this right now, either live or on our podcast, you'll see the book cover there, Proofs of God. We have links to it. It is truly written, in my opinion, like reading one of C.S. Lewis's books, that has these logical conclusions and interaction actions. I really love that your writing style. It's even when I've read your book, Counting to God, which is a little headier, you still have a
Mhm.
way of writing that makes it, that relates it, helps illustrate so that people who may not have as, like me, with not as developed of a brain can understand. And I so enjoy it. God bless you, and thank you for all that you do, and for sharing your knowledge with us, because it leads us closer to the God story.
Thank you for having me. It's always wonderful to see you. Appreciate it.